I'm having a wonderful chat with pianist Gayle Martin. She is in Houston. I am in Santa Barbara. And we are discussing her CD, To Keep the Dark Away. Came out in 2016. It was recorded in 2015. And I'm in the process of finishing a review of that wonderful CD. And we're doing the video interview now that will go up at performingartsreview.net in a tiny little bit, maybe a few days. This is a program of Liszt, Prokofiev, and Judith Schatten, and we're going to want to discuss Judith Schatten a lot. How about is it Schatten or Schatten? It's that potato.
Well, actually, I've always called her Judas Shaitan. The
Schatten.
long A, Shaitan.
Okay,
Yes.
all right. It's my Anglophilia that makes me want to go Schatten. Schatten. All right.
Yeah.
Judith Schatten, music of Judith Schatten, and what incredible music it is. We're going to discuss it. Let's just kind of let me give a little overview of this CD. I guess I can safely say, and you mentioned it in the program notes in putting together this programming, Gayle, about imagery and literature and so on. Give us an idea of what is your life in terms of how you respond to literature and music and so on, because this is certainly that kind of a CD.
Yes. Well, I grew up, I would read a book a day, and I loved music, and I loved to draw. And my father had given me the books of the great museums of the world, the old time life books. So my music, my life was immersed in that kind of stuff. And when I play music, I find myself drawing on stories, on literature, on art, on visual images, and I find that that makes it special. It makes it special to me, anyway. And with this CD, everything told a story, like with
Yeah.
starting with the Judas Shaitan pieces that were inspired by the Emily Dickinson poems.
Exactly. Thank you for that intro. Let's have a look. So we're dealing with, for example, the first track, Widmung, Robert Schumann, and an arrangement by Franz Liszt. Gorgeous, gorgeous. Schatten's, how many other? Five. Shaitans.
Shaitans,
Shaitans, thank you. One, two, three, four, five. Emily
yes,
Dickinson poems, and I want to talk to you a little bit later. Let me get through the thing a
okay,
bit. But to me, again, for lack of another word, I find her writing for these in terms of describing musically these Emily Dickinson poems as almost kind of pointillistic, if that makes any sense. Uh,
some
little
of them are, yeah,
little sparks and images and little bright moments and such. And to me, that speaks to Emily Dickinson's poems a great
yes,
deal, short and sparkling and very interesting and very
yeah,
deep. So we'll discuss that. Then, of course, you have on the CD one of my favorite composers, Sergei Prokofiev, Romeo and Juliet, 10 pieces. This is the Opus 75 for piano. Uh, incredibly beautiful performances, if I may say, of these pieces. We'll talk about that. And then a Shaitan piece, a Judith Shaitan piece that is completely opposite in so many ways. We'll discuss that from her To Keep the Dark Away, the Fantasy
yes,
on Saint Cecilia. Wow.
yeah,
Just as I thought, just as I was kind of coming down from the pointillism, I find myself in this deep, thick, rich broth of polytonality and
yeah,
smashing chords and all kinds of power. We'll
that's
talk about
right.
that. And then the Ballade of the Flying Dutchman, again, Wagner, Liszt. And you mentioned a little earlier that Liszt had tremendous respect for Wagner, so kind of more or less left things alone, just transcribed pretty straightly from the score, Flying
Yes.
Dutchman, and Isolde's Liebestod. Wagner Liszt. You see what I mean, everybody, about this particular CD? It's full of imaginings, aided even by literature and words and so on. Why don't we just start? Can you give me an idea of how you how did you come about organizing this CD in this particular manner?
Well, that took a lot of thought. I wanted to juxtapose. Well, I thought the Wiedmung would be a good beginning because it's short and it's
It
gorgeous
is.
and it's a love song, and nothing is more beautiful. So I thought that would be a good opener. And then going into the five pieces of Judith, I matched them with five of the 10 pieces of Prokofiev. And so it's
Interesting.
5 and 5 there. And
Interesting.
yes, and then alternating. The 5 pieces of Judith, they're a little minimalist. They're
Hmm.
short. They're they remind me a little bit of the Debussy preludes in the way that each one evokes something. And we could go through the poems if you want to, but the first one, to keep the
Let's
dark
just do
away.
that. Yeah, let's just have a look at
Yeah,
the first, for example.
yeah. The first one, it's all about kind of solace. The poem has to do with whistling in the dark and talking through your courage, that type of thing. And it's just a suggestion. And I found that one to be, well, I would think of solace when I
Mhm.
would play it. The second one is very, very funny because it's I forget what the name of it is. Something about twirling on the toes
A
and
glee possesseth me.
it possesseth me. Yes, and it's all about a girl who's twirling on her toes and looking in the mirror and pretending all these things about maybe being an opera singer and just being silly. And so when I would play that, I would be as silly as I could possibly be. And I played it in that spirit. And the wonderful thing about playing Judith Chaitin's music is, of course, I work with her, but she writes out what she wants, and she's very particular. But then there's always room to interpret. And so with the glee possessed of me, I found myself, the more I play it, the sillier I get. And it was just, anyway, it was, that was fun.
By the way, you've
And
mentioned something very, very important about how to convey the meaning of music. It is not about sitting down and playing the notes.
no,
That's
no.
just the very, very, very beginning of the process, learning the notes.
Absolutely. And the first time I saw the notes to, for example, the glee possesseth me, I thought, what is this? What is this? And then I started reading the poem and realizing that some of it was twirling around in a silly, silly manner. And all these little stops and starts. And the third one is very straightforward because the third one is all
It
about the
is.
struggle,
Yeah.
and it's difficult. It's relentless. It evokes a terrible struggle,
It's
and
powerful as well.
yeah,
An actual suffering strengthens.
strengthens me.
Yeah.
Yes, and musically, it relentlessly goes to the end, and the cacophony, the sound keeps strengthening, and then it stops suddenly. And then the next one, I believe, is the celestial one,
Yes, the auroral light.
the auroral light. Well,
The words of the 19th century, the auroral
yeah,
light.
yes. And so, with that, I just think about outer space, just going into a different dimension.
And that's what
And,
it does.
or,
It floats, it
yes,
drifts, it
floats.
kind of sparkles like distant cosmoses. It's
Yes, or the
magical what she creates.
or the aurora borealis, that type of thing. Very, very beautiful. And then the last one is about going through a garden with a dog, and I mean the poem is about that it doesn't have that title, but it's very funny because they're bird sounds and there's a glumping dog, and so I feel like there are these two voices in that. There's a bird that flits, and then there's a dog that is much more cumbersome and earthbound.
And the
And
bird, by the way, is quite indifferent, according to Emily Dickinson, swinging on an upturned wheel, as I recall, whose spikes a dizzy music makes, uh,
yes,
to
yes,
feed casually as the carousel upon which this bird is riding passes by a branch or something. It's
yes,
one of the
yes.
imagery of Dickinson is fabulous.
And the piece ends with that bird flitting away.
Yeah. So,
So I would just think of those things, and then of course, as a pianist, you are always thinking in terms of color
yeah.
at the keyboard, kind of painting. And it's such a different piece, as you pointed out, to her other piece, which comes later in the program.
Why don't we talk about Fantasy on Saint Cecilia now, so we can discuss both
Yes,
of Judith's pieces. By the way, both of these were commissioned, were written for you specifically.
yes,
So
Yes.
that's marvelous. My question was going to somewhere down here in my questions. I've kind of lost track, but about the Fantasy on St. Cecilia is that this is really a big, dense, thick three movement piece. How did you begin to unravel it?
Well, she first wrote that for piano and orchestra.
Oh, that's right. It
So
was a concerto. That's right.
it had
Yes.
started, and I've also recorded the concerto. So, um, how did I start unraveling this? Well, it starts the piano version starts off with arm bangs, and there are flourishes throughout where I'm allowed to do things at the piano that your mother does not let you do with the
Yes.
piano.
Uh,
Like almost double fisted glissandos and all kinds of crazy things. So that's fun. And
and
then
by the way, very specifically notated, I'm quite sure. In other words,
very
yes,
yes,
very
yes,
specifically noted. Not just
yes.
craziness, but intended, intentional
Intended, very, very intended.
sound and sound clusters and
Very
noises and moods. Yeah.
clusters of sound, yes, and very, very. The other thing about the Saint Cecilia is she wrote it in the Lisztian
Mm,
manner,
yeah.
meaning that she wanted it to be very virtuosic,
Yeah.
very intense, almost a romantic feel to
Mm.
it. The last movement was full of octaves, jumping
Her
octaves, which is
martyrdom, yeah, you
and
mentioned that's the last movement. Yeah.
and you would she would contrast the big places with very, very emotional comments, almost recitatives from Saint Cecilia, and some of them were heartrending, and some of them were more meditative. The first movement, there was more of a depiction of the society that she lived. So the first movement, very a little bit more constrained in terms of feeling, because it was kind of giving you what she was up against. But the second movement, she's in a meditative mood. She's kind of being prayerful, but not happy. This was not a happy person. But there is the St. Matthew's Passion that goes through
Yes,
it
that
a little bit.
fragment
Yeah,
is in there.
fragment.
Yeah, from St.
It's
Matthew
hidden,
Passion. Yeah.
and the last movement is just wild. It's fun to play.
Oh,
Uh,
really? Okay, good. Well,
yes,
that's somewhat encouraging
yeah,
because
yeah.
it
I'm
sounded
gonna
to
be.
me incredibly difficult. Hello.
It is. Well, I'm going to be playing it again in a concert coming up this October and at a university. And when I have played it at universities, what's happened is all the students want to play it, particularly the male students, because it's well, it has all
It's
these
it's
you
big.
get it's big and you get to use your
It's very
forearms.
macho in many
Yes,
ways.
and
You'll
you
forgive the
and you
expression.
yes, and you get. I know, I know, I know. And here are these two ladies. It's written for me and written by a woman, but it's just huge. And I've played the big works of Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff. This is as big as any of them. And it was fun. She was kind of exploring, I think, that side of the music also, and the music demanded it. The story. So it's
And then you kind of come down a little bit. The Ballade, the Flying Dutchman, love it,
oh right,
and
right.
Isolde de
Well,
Livingston.
the yes, we didn't talk about the five movements of Prokofiev.
Oh,
They
let's
see,
do.
yeah,
I'm ready. Love
yeah,
it.
that came after the five pieces of the Emily Dickinson. The thing that I think about when I do the Prokofiev is the American Ballet Theater, because I saw Alessandra Ferri and Julio Boca dance Romeo and Juliet, and I remember their phrasing. The dancers have their own phrasing, and I would remember the gestures that they would use when they would dance. And there were certain rubatos in a way that the dancers would take, and so when I play this, I would think of them. I would think of the picture that they would conjure and see if I could capture that, because watching them dance, it touched me deeply, and I went to every performance of them that I could. I was living in New York City at the time, so I saw the two of them probably six times, and I saw other fabulous ballerinas dance that. I loved it.
That must be why I was so satisfied with your performance. Here's my quick little anecdote.
Mhm.
Once upon a time in my youth, I spent 2 years conducting for Seattle Festival Ballet. And they did a
Oh wow.
couple of the big works every year, Summer, Swan Lake, and, big repertoire, and then smaller chamber repertoire. They finally went kaput. But I remember that was one of the big learning cycles for me, was learning as a conductor how to understand the rhythms and the movement and the phrasing of dancers. So maybe that's why, to me, I melted uh, when I heard your performance, because it was just so precise, so interesting, so complex, so rhythmically variegated, I guess if that's the right word. Just so
Mhm.
interesting. So brava again, especially
Well,
Mercutio. Loved that. Very,
yeah, yes. Thank you
very
for that. Ah,
Mercurian.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well,
Crazy
okay, so
and
we backed up a little bit, but now
mhm.
let's just, what I'm trying to get at is something about, you open the CD kind of mellow and gorgeous and romantic, and you end the CD in gorgeous and romantic.
Yes. Well,
Yes.
so I open with the Schumann list, and then I finish with the Wagner list. And of course, these are each one of these is a complete story within itself. The Ballade of the Flying Dutchman is straight from the opera, and I kind of always went to the Birgit Nielsen recording with that. I like to go to the
I
source.
remember her well from my youth in
So,
Los Angeles. Another story.
mhm. Yeah, yeah. Oh,
Turandot.
oh, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Well,
what a singer.
I just love the way she would sing this, and I've seen the opera, and so it's easy to kind of conjure the stormy seas and the prayer. And of course, that kind of goes with the Saint Cecilia also, because you
Mm,
have the storms around Saint Cecilia and her prayer.
yeah,
And so, I feel like there were connections throughout the even the in the very first one, the Liebeslied or the Widmung. There, the middle section of that is a prayer.
yeah.
So at any rate, and then of course the Liebestod is just the most beautiful thing ever written. And after that, that would have to come last,
Yes,
because after that you cannot sing anything
that
else. It's one of those
exactly.
things.
That is full stop,
Yeah.
as it were.
Full stop.
Yeah.
And the again, I would use the opera and listening. I got a score from the opera and everything, because the way it's written, there are certain lines that if you don't know that they're
Exit.
highlighted in the performance, they're not highlighted in the way the piano's written. And occasionally, I'll hear a pianist play it, and I think, they missed
That's
that.
right.
Yeah.
Yep, you got
So
to know the opera.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yes, yes,
Absolutely.
yes.
Well,
So
what's up? You're living in Houston. You're
yes.
still very active, apparently. Give us just a tiny little overview of what's going on in your life these days.
Well, I lived in New York City and then in Connecticut for so many years that I still go up there. I still have some students up there, and I still have concerts going up there. So when I come to Houston, they're saying, "Well, you have to come back here. You have to move up here." And then there's all these jokes going on now. It's like, where am I really living? So
So this the move to Houston has been
when
fairly recent, has it?
yes,
By the
about
way,
3 years.
Are you holding your iPhone or something through this entire
Yeah.
conversation? Well, may I salute the whatever the strength of your arm. Well done. That's a trick. Very well done. Gayle Martin, what a pleasure chatting with you. Give me finish just a little bit. Throw me a couple of concerts coming up. I think you mentioned some.
Oh well, I'm playing a concert, couple of concerts in October, November. Well, some down here in Texas, where I'm going to be putting the Judas Shaitan Saint Cecilia on,
Uh,
and in the first half, I'm going to be pairing that with a fantasy by Mendelssohn and the Sonata Quasi una Fantasia by Beethoven, and that's the Moonlight. So
wow.
and
So narrative, and more narrative.
narrative, and then after intermission, I'm going to pair Judas piece with a with some Villalobos, which I
Oh,
think is going to be a delicious
oh,
pairing.
yeah.
Very gonna.
Well, I think you have spoken to all of my folks that are watching and listening. Many are professional musicians. They know, as we do, but the tremendous effort and thought processes that are involved in putting together a program and making sense of it intellectually and so on for yourself as much as for uh, any listener. So I thank you for those wonderful lessons. I'm looking forward to getting the review up here very shortly, and I hope you'll be pleased with it.
Well, thank you.
I can speak briefly. We spoke before the interview. The sound quality, the engineering is absolutely just
They
first
were
rate.
fabulous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just first
What
rate.
what they did now, you have to realize when I was recording it, I did not hear the sound quality here. I did not get to
Yeah,
hear myself.
interesting. Yeah, I hadn't really occurred to me, but of course that
Yeah.
is that more off right because you're in the earphones. You're not hearing it. Is that what you mean when
Well,
you're
I
recording?
didn't have on earphones. I was just playing, but the room
Yeah,
they when you're doing a professional recording like that, the room that I was playing in was what I would call a dead room. So I
yes.
had to draw on my experience, my imagination. I had to just go for I had to just trust that it was coming out in the control room, and I would go into the control room. They would do a little playback, and it was like, oh, thank God, you know, because you would
That's
have the
fascinating.
live hall sound, but I didn't get to
And
enjoy
it,
that when I was
it, it,
playing.
it speaks
So
to how much you need these people in a recording.
it well, yeah, in a concert, you usually have the overhang of the hall, and I've
Yeah.
I've been able to play in some gorgeous halls.
Mm,
So
yeah.
um,
Anyway,
yeah,
it's just a superb quality of sound that I
yeah,
heard right from the get-go. It's fabulous.
they did a wonderful
And
job.
a wonderful and fascinating and varied program. It's just really, it's a keeper, I think. And I
Thank you.
hope I'll be able to communicate that to folks.
Well,
Pianist Gayle Martin, thanks very much for giving me a little bit of your time this afternoon. Thank
thank
you.
you. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.